My name is Isabel Hart. I'm 29 years old, and last Saturday my father punched me in the face in front of 39 people. It happened during his 60th birthday party inside the Hart family estate in Charleston, South Carolina. I wore a navy blue dress, brought a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, and carried something no one could see: 2 decades of suppressed truths and one final refusal to stay silent. The punch came after I declined to sign a set of documents he pushed toward me in front of the guests. "We need your signature to finalize the transfer," he said casually, like asking me to pass the salt. "It's routine." I recognized the paperwork: instantly offshore fund movement layered through shell companies. "No," I said. "Just that." "One word." His eyebrows lifted, then lowered into a sharp line. The room quieted, sensing the shift. "Excuse me," he asked. I stood my ground. "I'm not signing. And I'm not your legal puppet anymore." A cold silence wrapped the air. Then my mother let out a nervous laugh, light and calculated. "Oh, Isabel," she said, like I was a child misbehaving at church. My brother Colin, standing 2 seats away, clapped once, slow and mocking. "Serves you right," he said. "Finally grew a backbone, huh?" I didn't flinch. I looked my father in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I didn't lower my gaze. I think that's what triggered it. The loss of control. The fact that I wasn't playing my assigned role: the good daughter, the quiet fixer, the family legal cover. His hand moved before I could react: a full swing across the face, the sound echoing through crystal chandeliers and gasps. The force knocked me against the edge of the wine bar. My cheek burned. My pride cracked, and still no one intervened. Not my uncle, not my cousins, not the guests sipping cocktails and pretending to be shocked. My mother adjusted her bracelet. Colin took a sip of bourbon. No one helped me up. I remember blinking slowly, tasting blood on the inside of my lip, straightening my posture. I picked up my clutch, turned around, and walked out the door. No drama, no theatrics. Just deliberate steps through marble floors that once echoed with my childhood laughter. The valet handed me my car keys without a word. In the rearview mirror, I saw the swelling begin. My cheek was already red and rising like a warning flare. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a quiet motel on the edge of town. No reservations, no luggage. Just me and the hollow silence that comes after the mask finally shatters. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in hand, staring at my reflection in the warped mirror. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled. Past names I hadn't called in years. Past family members who wouldn't care. Until I reached 3 people. 3 names I had once saved for emergencies. I realized then I was the emergency. That night, I made 3 phone calls, each one a match. Each one aimed directly at the heart of the empire my family built on secrets, silence, and the myth of perfection. They didn't know who I had become. They still saw the girl they could manipulate, but that girl was gone. And by the time they discovered the truth, it would be far too late. There's something dangerous about growing up in a house where silence is currency, where obedience is mistaken for loyalty, and loyalty is weaponized against your own conscience. I learned early that speaking up meant punishment, not always physical. More often, it came as withdrawal of affection, of approval, of being seen. I was the second child, the afterthought. Colin was born 3 years before me and treated like royalty from the moment he could say deal. My father, Richard Hart, was the king of appearances. A real estate magnate with properties in 5 states, always the loudest laugh in any room. My mother, Evelyn, played the supporting role flawlessly. Pearl necklaces, charity galas, and smiling through everything, even betrayal. Especially betrayal. I grew up with 2 versions of my father, the one the world adored and the one who came home and pointed out everything I did wrong. My shoes were too loud, my voice too soft, my opinions too sharp. I remember being 12 and overhearing him tell my mother, "She'll never amount to much. She's too emotional." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in me where I didn't notice until it shaped everything I did. I tried to earn his approval with straight A's, scholarships, and law school acceptance letters. I thought if I could just be undeniable, he'd see me. He never did. When I graduated top of my class from Duke Law, he barely looked up from his phone. My mother's congratulation was a tight smile and a reminder not to let it get to my head. Colin, meanwhile, had failed upward into managing my father's shell companies. Every time a deal looked questionable, I was brought in to review the terms. That meant finding legal loopholes, creating just enough plausible deniability to keep the deals breathing. It made me sick, but I did it, because I was taught that family came first, because I thought saying yes would keep me safe. I was wrong. One night, I found myself sitting on the floor of my apartment documents spread out like a battlefield, trying to justify the unjustifiable. I was 25 and contemplating if dying would be easier than disappointing them. That was my rock bottom. Instead of dying, I resigned. Quietly. I told them I needed space. I moved across the country. Changed firms. Changed numbers. I took a position with a nonprofit law initiative focused on domestic abuse and financial coercion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the invisible survivor of a very visible family. I didn't tell anyone where I worked. Not because I was ashamed, because I knew if they found out they'd try to use it. Or destroy it. For 4 years, I built a quiet life. I helped women escape men like my father. I watched them walk into courtrooms with broken voices and walk out with protective orders. I started to believe I had escaped my own cage. But trauma has a long tail. The invitation to my father's birthday arrived in gold lettering. The kind of invitation meant to signal wealth, power, and unity. I almost threw it away. But then I saw the attached note, "Bring the papers. We need you back. Dad." Just like that. As if I were a pawn, he'd left off the board for a few turns and now wanted back in play. I stared at the card for a long time. My hands weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking from the clarity that came rushing in. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could do for them. I sat on the edge of my bed thinking about all the women I'd coached through moments like this. I remembered one client, Yasmin, who once said, "He only calls when he needs a clean version of the story." That was what my family wanted, a clean version. But I wasn't interested in cleaning anymore. I booked a flight. Not because I wanted to see them, because I needed to see if I could finally stand in that house without shrinking. I packed a dress, a charger, and a printed copy of every file I had ever refused to look at twice. I knew there'd be a cost to going back, but I was finally ready to pay it. There's a mythology to families like mine. The big house, the Sunday brunches, the perfectly aligned holiday cards. People think wealth insulates you from pain. What it really does is hide it better. My father came from nothing. That was his favorite story to tell at dinners. How he built heart properties from a single duplex he flipped during college. How grit and vision got him to the top. What he left out was how early he learned to control people. Not by force, at least not at first, but by leverage. He married my mother because she knew how to play the game. Her father had money and she had charm. Together, they became a social force. My father built the empire. My mother made it look immaculate, but beneath the surface was rot. Control was their love language. My childhood wasn't loud or violent. It was cold and exacting. Smiles at church. Silence in the car. The first time I cried in front of my father, he told me to save it for your therapist. I was 9. Colin, on the other hand, was adored, groomed. He could wreck a car at 16 and they'd buy him a better one. He could cheat on tests, lie about drugs, steal money, and it would be boys will be boys. I, meanwhile, was held to a standard so high it felt engineered to break me. A missed curfew meant 2 weeks of ignored text messages. A B+ meant lectures about underachieving. I once overheard my mother say to a friend, "Isabel's smart but not strategic like Colin. She feels too much." That line stayed with me. It made me afraid of my own empathy. I tried to be colder, harder. I modeled myself after the only women my parents admired: silent wives, corporate assistants, efficient, emotionless. I killed parts of myself just to fit in their frame. But no matter how much I contorted, I was always the too much child. Too loud when I disagreed. Too proud when I succeeded. Too soft when I forgave. They needed me to disappear without leaving. I became useful. I reviewed contracts before I understood what I was legitimizing. At 17, I was signing NDAs. At 21, I was flying to Miami to clean up a real estate deal gone wrong, coached by my father's lawyer. "Just say it's a compliance issue," he said. "No need to get technical." That was my training. Learn how to make illegal things sound complicated enough to be ignored. After law school, when I asked to work somewhere else, anywhere else, my father gave me a one-word answer: no. He reminded me of the tuition he paid, the internships he arranged, the access he granted. I owed him. The debt was emotional, but the weight was real. My mother always played innocent. She never raised her voice. She never raised her hand. But she raised Colin, and she protected Richard. She'd whisper things like, "Don't provoke him," or "He's under stress," as if the problem was always me. When I got promoted at a law firm in New York, she asked, "But do you think you'll find someone there?" As if the title didn't matter if there wasn't a man beside it. And still, some part of me hoped they'd come around, that maybe success would open a door to love. But love was never part of the contract. What they gave me was conditional presence, and what they demanded was absolute loyalty. That's what made the birthday party so cruel. Not just the punch, but the performance, the expectation that I would return smile sign and serve. And when I didn't, they reminded me who held the leash. What they didn't realize was that I had slipped it years ago. They thought I was still the girl who cried alone in her room, begging to be seen. They didn't see the woman who walked into court every week helping survivors name their abusers. They didn't see that I had studied them, understood their language, and built a life fluent in justice. They raised me in their image, but I evolved. And now they would answer to everything they taught me. The air in the Hart estate was heavy with pretense the night of the party. Every room smelled like Wealth sandalwood candles, imported wines, hand-cut floral arrangements in antique vases. But beneath the gold-trimmed grandeur was tension sharp and waiting. I arrived precisely at 6:40, exactly 15 minutes before the dinner bell. Not too early to appear eager, not too late to be scolded. I wore a navy blue sheath dress and low heels, understated professional. My mother greeted me at the door like I was a business associate. "You look adequate," she said, scanning me with surgical precision. "Try not to bring up politics or work. It's your father's night." Her smile held the rigidity of old porcelain. "Of course," I said. It was never my night. I walked past relatives I hadn't seen in years. Smiles were tight. Hugs were air. They all knew something about me, whatever version my family had fed them. That I was difficult. That I was distant. That I had lost her way. No one asked where I had been, only what I'd done to be invited back. Colin made his entrance late, as always, wearing an expensive blazer and a smug expression. He approached me with mock warmth, pulling me into a brief, stiff embrace. "So the prodigal daughter returns," he whispered. "You working for one of those activist nonprofits? Now? Must be cute playing lawyer for the poor." I didn't reply. There was no point. He leaned closer. "Dad needs you to sign something later. Just smile and don't make it weird." Then he walked off laughing with his entourage of second cousins and old fraternity friends. Dinner was set in the grand hall, a long mahogany table gleaming with silverware that hadn't seen daylight since the last PR-worthy holiday. My father sat at the head, naturally presiding like a king over his loyal subjects. I was seated 6 chairs away in the outer circle, the symbolic exile. The conversation was banal: property markets, golf scores, vacation homes. I listened in silence, chewing slowly, waiting. Midway through the main course, my father tapped his wine glass. "Before dessert, I'd like to make a family announcement," he said. "Some of you may know we're expanding Hart Properties into new international territories. We've structured a trust to facilitate this growth, and Isabel," he gestured toward me, "will be rejoining us to finalize the compliance paperwork." My fork paused mid-air. "No," I said. His eyebrows rose. "Excuse me," I placed my fork down. "I'm not rejoining anything, and I won't be signing." A ripple of confusion passed down the table. My mother's hand twitched toward her glass. "Isabel," she said sweetly, "don't be dramatic. This is just a formality." "It's fraud," I replied evenly, "and I won't be part of it." Colin chuckled. "You still on that morality kick? Grow up." My father's face shifted. Calmness drained. The room hushed, utensils freezing mid-air. "You're making a scene," he said, each word slow, heavy. "You can leave," I said, "or you can face consequences, but I won't be your cover anymore." That's when he stood. Not quickly. Deliberately. He walked the length of the table with the slow, measured steps of someone used to being obeyed. No one moved. No one spoke. He reached me, leaned down, and hissed into my ear. "You think you're special. You're a footnote. We made you. We can erase you." And then he pulled back and punched me. Not a slap, not a shove, a closed fist across my cheek. My head snapped sideways. My vision blurred. Blood filled my mouth. The room gasped, but no one stood. My mother said Richard not here. Colin laughed. Guess she needed that. I stood slowly, steadied myself on the back of the chair, and looked each of them in the eyes. No tears, no screaming, just silence. I walked out, heel clicking against marble like a metronome. No one followed. That was when I knew. This wasn't escalation. This was culmination. They had drawn the final line, and I had already crossed it. I didn't cry until I reached the car, not because of the pain. That would come later when the adrenaline wore off and the bruise began to bloom beneath my skin. No, I cried because I finally saw them clearly, without illusion, without hope. I had always carried this fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, something I did would make them love me. But love wasn't in their vocabulary. Control was. The slap was just punctuation on a lifetime of dismissal. It confirmed what I'd always feared and never wanted to admit. I was alone in that family. Always had been. The drive to the motel was silent except for the soft chime of my blinker and the low hum of late-night radio. I checked in using my ID and credit card. The clerk barely looked up. He didn't see the blood at the corner of my mouth or the swelling on my cheek, or maybe he did and chose not to care. I appreciated that. In the bathroom mirror, the damage was worse than I expected. Purple shadows were already forming, skin rising in an angry knot. I took a photo, then another, then several more. Different angles. Harsh lighting, clinical, detached. I needed a record. Evidence. My hand trembled not from fear, but from a strange calm, like something had clicked into place. I wrapped an ice pack in a hand towel, sat on the edge of the bed, and let my mind wander. It took me places I hadn't visited in years, like the time I was 16 and overheard my father call me a complication, or when Colin pushed me into a wall and I told my mother and she responded, "Don't provoke your brother." The patterns were clear now. They always had been, but recognition without action is just observation, and I was done observing. I opened my laptop, typed in a password I hadn't used in 4 years. A secure folder opened. Inside were documents I had once collected, just in case: emails, contracts, trust structures, off-book agreements. I hadn't planned to use them. I told myself I was being thorough, not preparing for war. But now the war was here. I reread a memo from 2018 where my father instructed a proxy to transfer funds through a nonprofit. The nonprofit had the same address as Collins LLC. I found emails from my mother's private account discussing how to shift press optics if anyone asked about the Miami foreclosure case. Each file was a fracture in the mask they wore. Each one a match waiting to be lit. But I didn't want revenge. That's what made the difference. I wasn't out to humiliate them. I wasn't seeking justice for the punch. I was seeking freedom. And freedom requires truth. Not for them. For me. For every girl who had to eat her anger. For every woman told to be quiet at the dinner table. For every daughter punished for disobedience while sons were celebrated for cruelty. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone, opened a note, and made 3 lists: people who could help me, potential consequences, and what I wanted when the dust settled. Then I made the first call. Not out of rage, out of clarity. It rang twice. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years picked up. "Isabel," he said. "What happened?" I took a deep breath. "I'm ready, and I have everything you need." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Say no more. I'll be there in the morning." 2 more calls followed. One to someone in law, one to someone in media. I gave no details. Only times, places, documents. They didn't ask why. They knew me well enough to understand that if I was calling, the dam had broken. I placed the phone on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't broken. For the first time in my life, I was done waiting for permission to protect myself. By sunrise, the silence had solidified into certainty. I stood by the motel window, watching a weak sun filter through slatted blinds, casting pale stripes across the faded carpet. My cheek was a constellation of red and violet, the swelling worse, but the pain distant like it belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed with the first text of the day. From Michael Tran, former colleague, now an investigator with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. My first call. "I can be in Charleston by noon," he wrote. "Don't move anything. I'll bring a scanner and a secure drive." I responded with a simple address and a single sentence. "They've been laundering through a 501c3 since 2016. 15 minutes later, I received a call from Nora Reed, civil rights attorney, and my second call of the night. We hadn't spoken since we co-counseled on a trafficking case 2 years ago. Her voice was crisp and alert. "I've reviewed your text. You want a restraining order and are prepared to press charges." "Yes," I said. "The physical assault is just the start. There's history, there's coercion, there's a pattern. Then we need documentation, photos, dates, witness names, any digital communication you can share." I told her I had all of it. "Do not contact your family," she warned. "From now on, every interaction goes through counsel, and you need to go somewhere safe, somewhere neutral. They have resources and influence. Stay unpredictable." I checked out of the motel within the hour, paid cash, no forwarding address, took a rideshare to an Airbnb 3 counties over. The host was an elderly woman who barely looked up from her book. That suited me just fine. My third call returned just after lunch. Lena Wallace, investigative journalist with an independent outlet that specialized in corporate crime and political corruption. She sounded breathless, not from urgency, but from curiosity. "You said you have internal documents from Hart Properties," she asked. "And you're willing to speak on record." "Not yet," I said. "But I'll provide metadata, email headers, bank routing patterns. I just want the story ready when the investigation begins." "This could take your family down," she said, not judgmentally. "Just factual." "You sure that's what you want?" "I want the truth documented," I said, "for when they try to rewrite it." She didn't ask for more. Just an encrypted Dropbox link and a promise not to publish without my consent. By mid-afternoon, Michael arrived. Worn blazer laptop bag, no small talk. He set up his equipment in the corner of the Airbnb living room. I handed over a flash drive. "I've been logging since 2017, I told him. At first, it was just for personal records. But when I started noticing duplicated documents, one for internal use, one for audits, I kept copies. He reviewed files quickly but thoroughly. Cross-referenced invoices. Flagged a memo discussing board manipulation in a charity under my mother's name. "This isn't just tax evasion," he said quietly. "If this leads where I think it does, we're talking RICO implications." "That's why I called you," I replied. "They've used me for years to sanitize their crimes. But I'm not their janitor anymore." Later that evening, Nora forwarded me a draft of the legal filing's emergency protective order complaint of assault and coercion supplemental affidavit detailing historical abuse. I signed electronically. She would file them in the morning. Expect pushback, she warned. They'll deny, they'll deflect, they might even countersue. "Let them," I said. "They can't erase bruises. They can't erase metadata." Lena checked in before sunset. She had begun backgrounding the nonprofit fronts and flagged a name I hadn't seen in years, Colin's ex-assistant. "She filed a whistleblower complaint 3 years ago," Lena said. "It was buried. But if we can find her, she could be key." I remembered the woman. Young, nervous. Gone suddenly without explanation. "I'll try to reach her," I said. "If anyone would understand what this is, it's her." By the time I closed my laptop, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something enormous. Not a cliff, but a gate. And I had the keys. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel heroic. I felt clean, like I had scrubbed the last trace of their influence off my skin. I made tea, sat in the quiet, let the night come in without fear. Because this time I had allies, and I wasn't hiding anymore. The next 72 hours unfolded with surgical precision. Nora filed the emergency restraining order at 8:03 a.m. The judge signed it by 9:30. By noon, a sheriff delivered it to my father's office, interrupting his standing weekly board lunch. The news made its way to me via Lena first. "We got a statement from Hart Properties," she said over the phone. "They're denying everything, calling it a deeply personal family misunderstanding that's been exploited by political agendas." I almost laughed. The script hadn't changed. Only the stakes had. Meanwhile, Michael had already submitted preliminary documentation to his supervisors at FinCEN. "There's enough here to launch an inquiry," he said, "but I'll be honest, it won't stay quiet for long. Your father has contacts everywhere. When they realize this is serious, the machine will activate." I nodded. I was ready. My cheek was still swollen, but I had stopped checking it in mirrors. The bruises weren't shame anymore. They were proof. That night, I called Maya, the former assistant Lena had tracked down. She was hesitant at first, speaking in short, clipped phrases. But when I told her what I was doing, her voice changed. "You have no idea how many nights I cried in that office," she whispered. "They told me if I broke my NDA, I'd never work in this industry again. You didn't break anything I said. You survived. And if you're willing, I want to help you do more than that." She sent me a folder later that evening. Emails, voice memos, calendar invites for meetings that didn't appear on official records. Colin had used her as a buffer for his messes, his lies, even his personal affairs. She documented everything, just in case, just like I had. Michael reviewed her folder and confirmed what we suspected: not just tax fraud, but likely misappropriation of donor funds, falsified invoices, and undisclosed lobbying. "This is a house of cards," he said. "One subpoena and it all collapses." "Then let it fall," I replied. On the fourth day, the media stories began. First local, then national. Real estate empire under scrutiny. Whistleblower complaint names. Hart Properties in financial probe. The details were light but pointed. My name wasn't in the headlines yet, but my father's was. My mother went silent. No denial, no support. Just absence. Colin, however, sent a barrage of messages. "You ungrateful little parasite. You have no idea who you're messing with. Fix this, or I'll make sure you never work again." I forwarded each one to Nora, who added them to our file. That same afternoon, I filed formal charges for assault. A court date was scheduled. It was official now. He wasn't just a man who had hit his daughter. He was a defendant in a criminal case. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like my feet had finally found the floor. That evening, I returned to the courthouse alone, walked through the marble halls I had once visited as a young associate, naive and eager to prove myself. I sat on a bench outside courtroom C and watched as strangers filed in and out, carrying their stories, their losses, their courage. And I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving my family. I was confronting them. Not in rage, not in vengeance, but in truth. Because fighting back doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like standing still, holding your line, and refusing to vanish when they tell you to. The first public blow landed on a Thursday morning. The Financial Times ran an exclusive Hart Properties under federal investigation for fraud, money laundering. Below the headline, a subtext: "Sources allege long-standing manipulation of nonprofit structures and shell accounts." The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. The photograph beneath the text showed my father leaving his office, face twisted in defiance, flanked by two attorneys. Lena called at 7:42 a.m. "The piece is blowing up. We're getting anonymous tips from inside the company. At least 2 senior managers are talking. They know what's coming," I said. "They're trying to jump before it burns." I opened my laptop and watched the fallout unfold in real time. Company stock dipped 18% before noon. By Friday, 2 major clients had suspended their contracts pending internal review. And by Saturday, an emergency board meeting had been leaked to the press. My father didn't show. My brother did. Colin stood before cameras outside corporate HQ, looking composed, confident, cold. "These allegations are unfounded," he said. "Our family stands united. We will weather this storm." I watched the clip 3 times. Then I sent it to Michael. That press conference contradicts internal memos I texted, especially the one dated April 2, 2023. Check the phrasing. He replied with a single line, "Good catch." Monday brought more cracks. 3 whistleblowers, anonymous legal filings, a class action suit launched by former investors citing fraudulent projections. Michael confirmed that federal investigators had expanded their scope to include both civil and criminal offenses. "It's moving faster than we expected," he said. "We're coordinating with the SEC now. Expect subpoenas." I wasn't surprised. I was numb. The cost of truth was finally being tallied. Meanwhile, the criminal assault case moved forward. Nora served a notice to Colin warning him against further intimidation. We submitted screenshots of his threats. The court accepted them as evidence of coercive behavior. My father's legal team requested a private arbitration session. Nora rejected it. "They want silence," she said. "We want truth." That week, Hart Properties suspended all dividend payouts. Several board members resigned. Donor organizations removed my mother's name from upcoming galas. The silence from their side grew louder than any defense. I started receiving messages from old family friends. Some were supportive. "I always wondered how you survived them." Others weren't. "What happened to loyalty?" One message came from my cousin Rachel, someone who had vanished into the family's social expectations long ago. She wrote, "I'm sorry. I believed their version of you. I see, now, I was wrong." That one made me cry. Not because of her words, but because I realized how little I had ever expected kindness. On the 7th day, my father was formally charged with multiple counts of financial fraud and aggravated assault. It was official. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a criminal defendant. The image of him in cuffs aired on every major network. My mother didn't appear at court. She filed for divorce 2 days later. The court filings included a claim that she had no prior knowledge of his financial conduct, but documents proved otherwise. One email from her private server had discussed timing the donation cycle to reduce audit exposure. Lena flagged it immediately. "She's not innocent," she said. "She just played a quieter game." Colin's tone changed overnight. Gone was the arrogance. In its place, desperation. "You've made your point," he wrote. "Call off the media. Drop the charges. We'll settle. Name your number." I didn't respond. There was no number that could erase what had happened. No dollar amount that could reverse the years of gaslighting, cruelty, and silent rooms. The consequences had finally arrived, not because I had demanded them, but because the truth once spoken refused to go back into hiding, and in its light, they all began to wither. It wasn't a single moment that brought peace. It came in fragments, quiet victories stitched into the fabric of everyday life, like the first time I slept through the night without dreaming of him shouting, or the day I walked into my new office at Whitmore and Finch, the top compliance firm in the Northeast, and was greeted not as someone's daughter, but as Isabel Grant, senior analyst. They had read about the investigation, of course. They knew, and they hired me anyway. "Your work," the managing partner said, "tells us who you are. Not your last name." That sentence carried more healing than years of therapy. I moved into a new apartment, modern, small, full of light. I bought my own dishes, my own towels. I deleted old numbers and changed my email. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. My days became simpler. Wake up, work, breathe, sleep. No sudden calls, no threats, no demands to perform loyalty under the guise of love. The trial was scheduled for early spring. I didn't attend the preliminary hearings. Nora handled everything, but I read every transcript. Each word was a blade cutting through the myth they'd built. At one hearing, a former accountant described how my father demanded he adjust quarterly reports to match projections. At another, a client testified about being pressured into donation loops that funneled money into shell accounts. And then there were the personal testimonies. Maya took the stand. So did 2 former interns. They spoke of intimidation, of whispered threats, of being told, "You're lucky to be here. Don't forget who gave you that luck." I knew that line. I'd lived it. I had it carved into my memory. My mother never testified. Her lawyers negotiated a sealed settlement that included financial penalties and limited liability. She moved to Florida and, according to Lena, was reinventing herself as a life coach. The irony wasn't lost on me. Colin disappeared from the public eye after a brief, disastrous interview where he claimed this is all just a coordinated attack from a bitter sister. The backlash was immediate. Sponsors pulled out. The company's final remaining deals collapsed. The board voted to dissolve Hart Properties entirely. It was over. I visited the site of their old headquarters one evening. It was half demolished, covered in scaffolding and dust. I stood across the street and watched the wind pull at a flapping plastic tarp. A man passing by glanced at me. "Shame what happened there," he said. I nodded. "Yeah," I replied. "Shame." He didn't know who I was, and I didn't offer it. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. Not the one who needed to be seen to feel real. Not the one who thought love was earned through suffering. I was something else now. Someone whole. Later that week I received a letter, handwritten, from Rachel again. "I hope you know she wrote what you did saved more than yourself. We all watched you stand when the rest of us froze. Some of us are learning how to move again because of it." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because I needed validation, but because it was a reminder when one person breaks the cycle, the cracks spread outward. Light gets in. I began volunteering with a nonprofit that supports women leaving abusive family systems. Quiet work, not glamorous, but meaningful. Each time I listened to someone else's story, I heard echoes of mine, and I told them what no one had told me. You are not the sum of what they said you were. You are not broken for leaving. You are brave. And someday, your life will be your own. That was my truth now. My worth didn't live in their approval. It lived in every morning I woke up and chose myself, in every breath I took without fear, in every story I helped someone else tell. I wasn't healed, not entirely, but I was healing, and that finally was enough. Spring brought softness. Light filtered differently through my windows. My days no longer felt like battles. The air itself seemed lighter, as if even the city had exhaled alongside me. On the anniversary of the dinner that night that ended everything, I did something simple. I bought myself flowers, white lilies, a gesture no one else had ever made for me. I placed them on my kitchen table and sat beside them, letting the silence of my apartment wrap around me like a warm coat. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because the grief had reshaped itself. It was no longer a jagged hole. It was a quiet room inside me, one I could visit when needed but no longer lived in. That day, I also recorded a video. Not for fame, not for attention, just for others who might be standing at the same edge I once did. I looked into the camera and said, "This is for anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, to put family above truth. I know what that weight feels like. I know how loud silence can be, and I know the cost of pretending. But here's what I've learned. Breaking the cycle doesn't make you cruel. It makes you brave. Walking away doesn't make you heartless. It means you finally remembered that your heart matters too." I paused, then added, "The people who truly love you will never ask you to sacrifice your self-worth to earn their affection. And the people who demand your silence are the ones most terrified of your truth." The video went viral within days. I received thousands of comments, some from women who had lived almost the same story, others from strangers who just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know I needed to hear this. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about them. It was about breaking open something dark and letting light flood in, not just for me, but for anyone watching. I received another letter weeks later, from a woman named Elaine in her 60s. "I left my husband last month," she wrote, "after 34 years of pretending. Your story made me believe it wasn't too late." I sat with her words for a long time. That's what stories do. They echo, they ricochet, they travel further than we ever expect. That's the real legacy, not the name you inherit, but the truth you refuse to bury. One afternoon, walking through the park near my office, I saw a father scolding his daughter sharply, his tone too harsh. The girl looked maybe 8, flinching as he leaned in. My stomach tightened, but then he stopped. A woman, possibly the girl's mother, placed her hand on his shoulder and gently pulled him back. He exhaled, lowered his voice. The girl looked up surprised. I don't know what happened next. I kept walking. but I felt it something had shifted. Somewhere a pattern had bent, not broken maybe, but bent. And that's where it starts. Not with grand gestures or dramatic exits, but with someone saying no more and meaning it. With someone choosing not to pass down what they barely survived. That's what I chose too. I would never create the kind of family I came from, but I would build one through friendship, through community, through truth. One defined not by shared blood, but by mutual respect and kindness. That's the family I'm choosing now. And if you're reading this, maybe you're choosing it too. Maybe this is the moment you decide that surviving isn't enough, that you deserve more than endurance, that healing is not a betrayal but a revolution. That's what this story was always about. Not revenge, not destruction, but transformation. We teach people how to treat us by what we allow, by what we challenge, and by what we demand. And I finally demanded dignity. So can you. The cycle ends where we say it does. And on the other side, there's peace, there's breath, there's freedom.